Very simply, what war is associated with Psalm 83?
Okay.
Psalm 83.
Yeah, Psalm 83. Let me go through there and actually read it. This is something that's being popularized by a number of guys. This is a psalm of Asaph. Asaph lived during the time of David, and so that's just before 1000 BC. It says, "Do not keep silent, O Lord, O God. Do not hold your peace. Do not be still, O God. For behold, your enemies make a tumult, and those who hate you have lifted up their head. They've taken crafty counsel against your people and consulted together against your sheltered ones. They have said, 'Come and let us cut them off from being a nation, that the name of Israel may be remembered no more. For they've consulted together with one consent. They form a confederacy against you, the tents of Edom and the Ishmaelites, Moab and the Hagrites, Gebal, Ammon, and Amalek, Philistia with the inhabitants of Tyre. Assyria also has joined with them, and they've helped the children of Lot, Selah. Deal with them as with Midian, as with Sisera, as with Jabin at the brook Kishon." And there's an imprecatory passage that comes after this, confounding them and that kind of stuff. And so what's been happening is people have come to this psalm and decided that this is the basis of the Israeli Palestinian conflict, along with some of the other Arab nations, or Muslim nations, I should say. There's a problem with this. And, let me, actually, I looked this up. Let me see if I can find this. Yeah, here it is. This is from Joel Rosenberg, and not to pick on this guy, and that's not what I'm doing, but I don't agree with him. He says this: "Today's headlines are ripped right out of the verses in Psalm 83. Rosenberg, who is Christian, wrote, verses 6 through 8 in Psalm 83 tell exactly where these various enemies of Israel and the Jewish people live," he wrote. "The verses list Edom, the Ishmaelites, Moab, the Hagrites, Gebal, Ammon, Amalek, Philistia, Tyre, and Assyria. The tents of Edom and the Ishmaelites, that's southern Jordan and Arabia. Moab and the Hagrites, that's central and north Jordan. Gebal and Ammon and Amalek, that's Lebanon and Syria and the Sinai Peninsula. Philistia, that's the Gaza Strip. With the inhabitants of Tyre, that's more of Lebanon. Assyria also has joined with them. That's Syria, Lebanon, and Iraq," Rosenberg wrote. Okay.
Is that Joel?
Yeah, Joel Rosenberg. Yeah, that's what he wrote. Okay, here's the problem with this. When you go through the Bible and you look at the prophetic battles that are going to take place with Israel, specifically in the Old Testament, the one that you see is the Gog-Magog war. And what is not being done there is they're not taking geographical locations and identifying those geographical locations with the people who lived there in the last days. What is going on there, for example, Magog and Rosh and Meshech and Tubal, these are all people groups, and they happen to have started out at the northern part of the Black Sea, and they migrated north, and they became what we know as the Russian people. And so we call that Russia, okay? It's not Russia, it's the Russian people. And if they had migrated to China, it wouldn't be China, it would be that people group that was living in China. And so you got this people group that's living in Russia. You got the same thing with the sons of Togarmah. Sons of Togarmah are a people group, it's the Turks. And they happen to still be living in Turkey. And then you have the same thing with the Libyans, and you have the same thing with the Ethiopians. Those people groups, when you're talking about Cush and Libya and actually Old King James is Put, but when you're talking about those people groups, they happen to live in the same territory that they lived in thousands of years ago. In other words, they weren't wiped out. one of the cool things about that is that when the Bible identifies these people, it's identifying the families. And so you can change the name of your country, you can change your geography, but you cannot change your family. And so we are able to identify those groups of people that are going to come down and attack Israel during the Gog-Magog war, and that's out of Ezekiel 38 and 39. Well, we got exactly the same thing here. Moab and Edom and the Hagrites, that is not Jordan. Those are people groups. And so the Idumeans are also Edom. So the Edomites used to be in southern Jordan, and they were chased out of southern Jordan by the Nabateans, and they ended up just south of Judah, and the people of Israel ended up subjugating them, and they actually were forced to convert to Judaism. And so when you're talking about Herod the Great, all the Herods, those guys are Idumeans. They're Edomites. And after the destruction of Jerusalem, you don't see these guys anymore in history. They disappear. When you're talking about the Amalekites, there are no more Amalekites. When you talk about the Ammonites, there are no more Ammonites. The people of Gebel is a city on the coast of what we would call Lebanon that actually the name got changed to Byblos, and those were Phoenicians. They were Canaanites. There are no more Canaanites. They don't exist anymore, and so they were cursed of God and taken out. And you have the same thing with the Hagrites. You have the same thing with the Moabites, the Philistines. There are no more Philistines. So the Philistines were what were called the Sea Peoples, and they came from some of the Aegean islands. They probably had Hellenistic backgrounds in the sense that they had kind of a Greek background. They were Aryan type peoples, and when the nation of Babylon came down against the Middle East, they actually went into captivity before the destruction of Jerusalem. So right around the 600s, the Philistines were all taken into captivity by the Babylonians. They went to Babylon, and you see them around for about 150 years, and then they just disappear. They don't exist anymore. And so the Palestinians are not Philistines. And so it doesn't matter if they're living in the same geographical location. When you're talking about Palestinians, you are talking about people from Cyprus, you're talking about people from Syria, you're talking about people from Jordan, you're talking about people from Egypt. Arafat was an Egyptian. And he called himself a Palestinian. In fact, the Palestinians didn't call themselves Palestinians until the 1960s. And so they are not the Philistines. And so that's the problem with taking this passage and trying to equate it with what's going on in modern times. The other thing that you have is you don't have the prophets, whether you're talking about the Old Testament prophets or whether you're talking about the book of Revelation, never talks about this group of people. Well, they don't exist in the first place, so you can't talk about that group of people. But they never talk about this group of people in a last days battle against Israel. This is stuff that was taken place during the time of David, and so that's when these things were going on.
So Rosenberg's pretty smart. What's the disconnect here?
I think that a lot of times what we want to do, this is something that is common to like prophetic studies. What you want to do is you want to place yourself, squarely in a position where Bible prophecy is being fulfilled around you. Mm-hmm. And so you see this all down through history. We all want to be the generation that Jesus is coming back to take out of here, and I think that Jesus designed it that way. But because of that, you have guys back in the early centuries of the church taking the book of Revelation and trying to apply it to, well, it wasn't in the early centuries, but a few centuries after the first century. trying to take the book of Revelation and apply it to Roman emperors coming up against Jerusalem and that kind of thing, because again, they wanted to put themselves in the times that those things were going on. That is not what the passages say, and it's not a good interpretation of those things. You even have that into more modern times. I was just reading Matthew Henry in the book of Revelation. It's amazing the things that he goes through and tries to make the book of Revelation mean that have nothing to do with what the Bible actually says. And so he's trying to find a historical fulfillment, for the book of Revelation, and it's, it doesn't work really well. And so I think that's one of those things that people like to do. We know that there's an Arab-Israeli conflict, and we know from Scripture that there's going to be a bunch of Muslims that come down against Israel. We have that flat out taught in the book of Ezekiel with the nations mentioned, and we're told that it happens in the last days, and flat out told those things. That is not what's taken place in this passage right here. It doesn't say that these things take place in the last days. It was apparently going on at the time of Asaph. That's why he's writing the song. That's why he's complaining about it. That's why he's asking God not to be silent, and that's why he's asking God to save Israel. And so I think this is something that's already been fulfilled. And with some of these guys, if the Edomites were still around, then the prophecy wouldn't be fulfilled.
Yeah.
Because God made a promise that they weren't going to be around. Same thing with the Amalekites. And so you can't have that going on. And like I said, some of these are Canaanite people groups, and Canaanites don't exist anymore. So you can't. I'm not somebody who would take that and apply it to modern day issues.